So did you know from 1999 to 2014, there was a 65% increase in the use of antidepressants by Americans. And between 2014 to 2018, that number doubled. The percentage of Americans using antidepressants. In Europe, it's no better. In Europe, around the same time period, there was a 147% increase in the use of antidepressants. And I was just taking a look at some recent celebrities that have been making a lot of comments and criticism really around antidepressant use. One of them, people I'm sure you guys will know, Kanye West, he was criticizing psychiatric medications in the pharmaceutical industry. I don't think it's any secret that he has had some, battles with mental health issues, especially bipolar disorder. Courtney Love had some criticism and issues with opioid addiction, especially around Kurt Cobain and the fact that the pharma industry, she believes, promoted the use of opioids inappropriately. Tom Cruise, he talked a lot about psychiatric medications, the famous 2005 interview with Matt Lauer on NBC News, and then others as well, like Roseanne Barr, and there's been many others. So what's going on here? Is the pharmaceutical industry trying to manipulate the market and trying to, establish a need for antidepressants when there really is not a need? The truth is, again, I could tell you from coming from the pharmaceutical industry and working there as a long time in an area called medical affairs, that the pharmaceutical industry, by and large, they have people that are trained to go out and talk to physicians about these medications, and they're supposed to be doing it in a fair, balanced way. And I put fair balance in quotes, but what that means is that they're supposed to be talking about the effectiveness of the drug, but also some of the adverse events or the safety issues with these drugs. Now, it's no surprise, I think, to many people, if you look at the data, that for many of these antidepressants, actually long-term, there's a lot of problems. And I think this is one of the reasons why there's been a lot of criticism and critique around antidepressants and psychiatric medications in general. The reality is, do they actually work? Do they get to the root cause of the problem? I think for a lot of these medications, especially for patients with severe schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, where there's really a serious situation where if you're depressed and you're really, having suicidal ideations and things like that, these medications can definitely help. I think what's happened and where there's been a lot of more critique around these medications is more for people that maybe have mild depression, and then really questioning, are these medications a good strategy to deal with some of these things? Or, can these patients go, for example, to behavioral therapy and things like that? Now, look, I'm going to give you a disclaimer right now. I am not a mental health expert. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm coming at this from the perspective of how the pharmaceutical industry approaches this and whether these celebrities really ultimately have any right for having beef with the industry. And I would say to some degree they do. And that may surprise some of my colleagues that work in the industry, but I would argue that if you look at the data, the sheer increase in the number of people that have been diagnosed with depression and that have been put on antidepressants is just so much higher in terms of the rate of increase than you would expect in any other type of disease area. And you have to ask why. And I think that from my perspective, at least, I think much of that is related to the environment and social factors. I mean, if you think about it, what changed between 2014 to 2018 that caused a double in the number of people in America that are going on antidepressants? I think one of the big things is social media. And I think for a lot of people, they're on social media, they're looking at what other people do on social media, and people have that FOMO effect, right? The fear of missing out, and that can make them be really depressed and feel down at times. I think also social media has created this sense of isolation. I know for younger children, I have children myself, and today the children, when they're going out there and doing play dates with their friends, it's very different than when I was a kid, right? It has to be planned and organized. Oftentimes it's not even live. Sometimes it could be virtual, which is really to me was really strange. I never forget one time I was sitting down at my parents' house and my kids were they're playing on their devices. It was kind of like one of those gaming devices, and all of a sudden one of my kids just started blurting out crying. They just started crying. And I remember my father looking around like, what happened? And it was that they were playing virtually with another kid somewhere else in the town, and I guess something happened in the game, and that he just broke down and started crying. And so it gives you an idea of the fact that today's kids are very, very different in how they're raised versus back in my day. And so I think for a lot of children today, that isolation, I think, definitely plays a big role in potentially leading to more depression, more anxiety, so forth and so on. So I think, pharmaceutical industry definitely created a greater urgency and need to diagnose and treat these patients. And look, with depression and anxiety, it's very arbitrary. It's really just based on the clinician and what you tell them. They have a scoring system to kind of determine whether or not you fall into that category where you should be prescribed the antidepressant or the anti-anxiety medication, so forth and so on. So I definitely think that it's not like an objective clinical test that you can do to say, yes, you have depression, you have these biomarkers. It's tough to really say that because there's so many factors that lead to things like depression and anxiety. And of course, you've heard me talk about opioids. And, Courtney Love bringing up opioids and what happened to Kurt Cobain, of course, the big tragedy. It wasn't really apparent up until 2019, I think, when the opioid crisis really kind of came to a head in the United States, that people realized, wow, this is creating a lot of issues. And when it started to get a lot of attention in the media. And so, ultimately what we do know is that some pharmaceutical companies were pushing these drugs inappropriately in a biased way. If you like this content and you enjoy it, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button. Make sure you also let me know in the comments section what other types of topics or comments or topics or issues rather are you interested in hearing about when it comes to the pharmaceutical industry. I'll talk to you guys later.